probably a good place to start is about terminology, I think, so that I get this right for you. Because my son, and you might find that I slip up on this, because my son does not like to be described as autistic. He likes to be described as having autism, or a person with autism, because he doesn't see it as like his whole identity. He just doesn't see it that way. So I tend to not use the terminology that the community prefers, because he doesn't prefer it, and I want to just honor what he prefers. But I'm very aware that there is a lot of the autistic community are very have very strong opinions about this, and I just wondered if you are familiar with that, and whether you wanted to kind of just sort of speak to that a little bit, just to start off with.
Yeah, sure. So for myself, I identify as autistic.
Yeah.
But I do know in the autistic community, there is a split around having autism or being autistic.
Yeah.
But it comes down to the individual's choice. So you've got to ask them, so how do you want to be identified, having autism or being autistic? And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, like, so generally and how I speak about autism is I use identity first language, but then I go and say that ask that individual what they prefer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you explain, so I understand why my son prefers, he's like, I'm a person first and I have autism. But I also have heard the other perspective of why people prefer to be identified as autistic. Can you explain why you prefer that?
Well, I prefer to identify as autistic because I was born autistic and that's all I've ever known.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it's like to be neurotypical.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And so it's
not my whole identity, because I'm a Christian, I'm an auntie, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. So I kind of explain it like that, that we all have these different identities within ourselves. And so it's kind of intersectionality pretty much.
Yeah. And so so thank you for explaining that. And it's just really good for me to, so if I slip up, it's because of habit with my son. And but I will do my level best and to make sure that I don't. So because I know that a lot of autistics will be listening to this episode, and I know that this is actually really important for them. So I think an important issue, and I think I just want to honour that as well, with respect to the community, because I don't know what it's like to be autistic. So I've got to really be informed by the autistic community about what is helpful for them. So yeah. So anyway, we'll moving on from there. You mentioned obviously that you're born autistic. When did you realize, or your parents realize, or what is, I mean, you might want to start with what your kind of family background is, with who's in your family and how you grew up, or where you grew up.
So sure. So in my family, there's my mum, and obviously there's my dad, but they broke up when I was very little, like when I was about 3. And then there's my older sister Naomi, my older brother Joshua, and our half brother Johan.
Mm-hmm.
And they're amazing siblings.
Yeah.
So I was actually born in Australia, but my
Okay.
parents are New Zealanders, but I didn't live there long enough to get my citizenship. I was born in the wrong year and all that, so that's a bit frustrating.
Yeah.
So New Zealander by birth. Yeah. And so I guess my mum started noticing, like, you know, differences about me from a very, very young age in Australia. Like, I was under the pediatrician when I was 18 months old, but the diagnosis really wasn't there set in stone. They were more focusing on speech and language delays and hearing issues, and, you know, so I had grommets, like the usual stuff. And I was seeing speech and language therapy and all that. And I guess when my mum moved back to New Zealand, there was kind of a bit of information lost in translation from Australia to New Zealand. So mum had to start it all over again in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's
and
hard.
so, you know, there was kind of misdiagnosis of dyspraxia and dyslexia to start off with when I was 10. But it wasn't actually until when I was 12 that I was diagnosed autistic. But that was in Australia. But that was only because my dad and stepmom took me privately somewhere, but they were doing it in the wrong ways, which I don't really want to go into it. But but anyway, so my mum didn't want to believe it at the time, but then she realized, oh, there is something going on a bit more. And so then I got evaluated when I was 15, and then I was diagnosed autistic then, and then also another misdiagnosis of an intellectual disability. So
At the same time when you were
yeah,
15?
Yeah. So I guess there was a lot of underachievements in the education system because I wasn't getting properly supported. So obviously it's going to look like an intellectual disability when it's not. But I think that misdiagnosis of intellectual disability happens quite a lot in autistics.
Right.
Yeah, statistics is showing that the graph of autistics being diagnosed with an intellectual disability is going down. So it's going to exactly, like, it's kind of going down to the point where it would look like in the general population of IQs.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting because I hadn't heard about that. So it's really interesting to hear your experience of that and to let you know, to say that this is actually really common and that it's actually improving because obviously there's a better understanding about what's going on. I first of all just as a mum to someone or an autistic child, you know, he was diagnosed when he was 8. And I know how hard that was for everyone. And yet you were 15 before you got a proper diagnosis. And I'm just wondering what that was like for you to go 15 years of not really knowing or being able to understand, or for the people at school or people around you to not really know or understand what's actually going on.
Yeah, so I guess like when I was 13, after I was diagnosed in Australia, I started researching dyspraxia and dyslexia because that's what the diagnosis I knew. And then I came across the term autism and I actually clicked on it. And I'm like, oh, okay, that actually describes me. But I was kind of content and not like just within myself knowing that, oh, okay, I identify with that.
Yeah.
But as soon as I was diagnosed when I was 15 in New Zealand, I started reading all the books on autism I ever could do. And suddenly high school was like, you can read? And I'm like, yeah. It's like they didn't realize what my specific interests were.
Yeah, which is key to learning for understand. Yeah, I totally understand. I think so all of this time were you in mainstream school? You were going to a mainstream school?
Mainstream school, yeah.
Yeah. And so for you, what was mainstream school like for you?
Well, it was a bit of a struggle
Mm-hmm.
Because like there was the bullying and stuff like that, and then there wasn't the proper support, and I guess it wasn't till like I got a bit of teacher aid support, but not a whole lot.
Mm.
Like an hour there or 4 hours there or whatever. So imagine being in high school, you only got 4 hours a week. Where are you going to put those hours when you've got so many
Yeah.
subjects a day?
Yeah.
And so actually in high school, my English and maths was so far behind that they put me on like correspondence in the back of the classroom for those two subjects with no support.
Mm.
And I'm
Oh.
like, okay, why? You know?
Yeah.
But I was at that point where I wanted to do the same work as everyone else. I
Mm.
didn't want to be doing some sort of individual English or
Yeah.
maths and
Yeah.
yet do science and all that sort of stuff without that being individualized either. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a bit of a weird scenario.
Yeah, it's weird, but it also kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because I think in these situations, this is where, and I don't want to get too, I have a tendency to get a little bit negative about school. Um, so I'm just watching myself at this moment. I've got a lot of teachers in my family and they're good people. But I'm not so keen on the system, and that's because the people that it doesn't work for, it really doesn't work for, and it to the point where I think in this case they're kind of prioritizing education over and above social interaction and self-esteem. And
Yeah.
there should never be a separation to that, because anyone going through, you can go, well, I know that I'll be telling you something that you resonate with, because even I felt like this going through school, and I'm a neurotypical person, right? So I came out of school thinking that I wasn't particularly bright. And it wasn't until I was in university much later and I got an A doing a master's that I thought, oh, maybe I'm wrong about that. And so I think that, you know, going back to your story, this happens a lot as far as I'm aware, is that there's this separation from, because you're not managing the system, you're not managing whatever we're doing in the classroom for whatever reason, we're going to separate you out. And this happens with kids with ADHD and all sorts of um, you know, neurodiverse children, and they get the very strong message that I'm different. I'm different, and I don't belong. And that's, I think, very painful experience to be singled out like that, because especially if you're doing something that's so different from the rest of everyone else, and you're even in a separate desk, they might be in shared tables or things like that, and you're in a separate desk and you're doing something separately. I think that's just so hard. And like, did it hurt, really?
I guess it did hurt.
Yeah.
Um, because like there was one time this other girl in my classroom asked the learning support teacher, so why does Gabby get to do correspondence for English and maths? And the teacher was just like very factual and just said, oh, you've got to be more than 8 years behind
Wow.
or
Wow.
something. And I was like, okay, gee, thanks. You could have asked me first before
Yeah.
telling someone.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that would have fueled the bullying as well, right?
Definitely, it did. In primary school, I had this one bowel accident at school.
Mm-hmm.
Some kids have problems, realizing when they need to go toilet. So I had this
Yeah.
one bowel accident ever in my whole entire life. And so these kids remembered it. And like later on down the track when I was like 12, they found out where I lived, put a letter in the box telling me to kill myself.
Oh my gosh. How old were you?
Like 12.
That's horrible. That's
It's really
really horrible.
horrible. And it's stuff
Oh,
that happens behind the scenes.
yeah.
Like, sometimes it's not like just in the school environment, but like people will see you on the street. So I was biking home from high school one day,
Mm,
and these kids that were younger than me just came up to me and just kicked my bike in.
yeah.
And I just stopped, and it was like, okay, why are these children doing this? You know, where are they
Mhm.
learning those behaviors from?
Yeah. And I mean, children, I think, and this is really hard for neurodiverse people, is that that children they don't tolerate difference very well.
Yeah,
But I think that could be changed. That difference could be celebrated. But because there's this tendency as children, and you'll remember when you were young, you want to fit in. I mean, even as an adult, we all still feel like this. We want to fit in because we want to belong, and we don't want to be different because we don't want to stand out, because we want to be accepted. But I think that's so hard because none of us are the same as one
yeah,
another. We've all got differences, whether they're noticeable or not. And so it would be, I think, probably would reduce bullying if we kind of had an environment, a school environment where we celebrated difference. Do you think?
totally. You know, like build on those strengths in the classrooms and don't signal children out, because like in primary school, I got singled out by the teacher because my handwriting was really messy in this piece of assignment work. And so one of the other students stood up and showed everyone this is not how you do the work. I'm like,
Wow.
how the heck? I didn't have a laptop back then, so pencil and pens was the only things. And if you can't write properly, well,
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's really, it must have been a very painful experience for you, and lonely as
yeah,
well. Is that, did you kind of have any friends at school or anyone that kind of was kind to you or good to you?
I had some friends when I was at one primary school, but then I changed to a different primary school. And while I did have friends there, they weren't friends that were always friends with me. They were only friends in certain situations,
Mm,
and which is kind of a bit confusing for an autistic individual. So there
yeah,
was one person that lived around the corner from me, and they're like, "Oh, we're only friends outside of school, not like inside
that's
of school."
horrible.
Yeah.
Did you understand why?
No,
You
I
didn't
had no
understand why?
clue.
Yeah, you didn't get that.
No,
Yeah. And was that hurtful as well?
I guess it was hurtful, yeah.
Yeah. And so how did you spend kind of lunch times and things like that?
Um, well, I guess like in primary school, in my reports it said I used to like to mother the younger children and
Oh,
with the younger children.
yeah.
So, I guess I found my friends with younger children for whatever reason.
Mm,
And um, but like in high school, I joined Girls Brigade and
yeah.
I made some amazing friends through Girls Brigade. Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, and we were long-time friends for a long time. But like we've grown apart now, which is okay. But it
Mm,
was Girls Brigade was a very good time for me.
yeah. And were they also at school, at high school?
There was
Go to the same
one
school?
there was one other person going to the same high school as me. But due to Girls Brigade, like you meet up like nationally for like, because I done leadership training for a Girls Brigade. So I made friends there, so they weren't necessarily in the town that I lived in, but they taught me how to text, and they taught me all the abbreviations in texting, but I've forgotten all that now.
I don't know if people use it anymore because of predictive text. I think it's sort of phased out a little bit.
Yeah, it has.
Not that I'm not, I mean, I'm too old to be cool, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I guess I'm a bit too old as well.
So yeah, so high school you kind of had you had this one friend from Girls Brigade at school.
Yeah.
Did you get to hang out with her or?
Really?
No.
She was in a year group younger than me. But like in the end, in high school, just because of the bullying and stuff like that, I just started hanging out in the learning support room at lunchtimes and morning teas, and would just read my book, do homework or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I like found this like this worldwide autism like first ever group and on the website and stuff like that. And I just started chatting to people on there. You weren't supposed to at school, but because they monitor it and all that, but they left me to my devices, and
Yeah, like
do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really good, like chatting to those people. But I guess like there was one other person that was allowed in the learning support room, and she was an student, and she was fantastic to me, amazing. And I guess I guess we weren't friends outside of school, but she was always really, really nice to me. And I guess because she was a refugee student and didn't have much friends herself.
Yeah, it's often, I guess it's people who are going through, and probably she probably struggled with feeling like she fit in as well, being a refugee or being new to the country or whatever, that whether her English wasn't perhaps fluent yet, or it's really good that that you had some, because I think sometimes high school can get that can be worse than primary school, right? So it's good that you had a strategy, I suppose, to take care of yourself, and you found a community online, and and someone who treated you with respect and care, and yeah. So how long, I mean, what was your experience, I guess, of teachers as well? I mean, you talked about some of them, some of the experiences you had when you were young. Yeah. What were your experiences in general?
I guess there were some very good teachers that I had that were very caring. Like there was a teacher that I had for maths that was also like not my dean, but your morning person that you go to, which I've forgotten what you call them, but she took me for maths, and like she adapted the maths for me, and so but she was teaching me the same stuff as everyone else. But even though I was a slow processor with doing it and stuff like that, she would adapt the tests and only test me on what she had taught me, and I would always pass with 100%.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And but doing NCEA, that was like that was mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my mum is not very good with her maths either, so
Neither
I
am
don't.
I.
I don't know if it's like some sort of genetic thing or something like that.
I reckon it is.
When I was in high school, I wanted to be a chef. And I was really good with the cooking, but although slow, but I wasn't so good with the academic work. But the teacher that I had for the cooking she wanted me to do NCEA for cooking, but the dean wouldn't let me.
Oh,
It's so frustrating, and
yeah.
I hope the culture of that school has changed now. You know, hopefully they know more and understand more and stuff like that. Because to have your hopes this dramatically drop out of your life forever, but
Yeah.
yeah,
That's really hard because, and also to find, it seems to me, to find something you're interested in and good at and let you excel at it. I think
yeah,
it's got to be the key to every child, surely.
yeah,
You know, to find that, to help them to find that and to support them in it, you know. So it's a bit heartbreaking, really.
it is.
And, yeah, and you know, when you look back on those school years, would you say that there's some trauma that that you carry away from that?
Yes, definitely. There's lots of trauma.
And how did it kind of, as you were kind of growing up, how did you kind of feel about yourself? What kind of messages did you kind of come away with?
I guess the kind of messages that I came away with, it's kind of like a split feeling because I knew I was a Christian. Well, was a Christian and am a Christian.
Hmm.
I knew that God loved me and that I was knitted in his womb of mum's womb and stuff like that. And I knew that I was loved and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
when it school, it felt like I just didn't fit in. Felt like I didn't have any worthiness in me because
Mm.
back in my days when you went to school, no, there was no disabled leadership people coming in to talk to the classes to go, proud to be disabled or proud to be
Yeah.
neurodiverse. That wasn't
Hmm.
there when I was in high school or primary school or anything like that, you know. But
Mm.
I don't think I ever met a teacher that was disabled, let alone.
Yeah. 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 So there was no kind of role models. There was
Yeah.
no, yeah. And yeah. And I guess, so you felt this sense of unworthiness, but on the other hand, you had this faith that told you that you were worthy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so did that faith help you as you were growing up?
Yes, my faith definitely helped me growing up. Definitely. I guess I was a bit of a Bible basher for I guess that was my special interest. I would memorize all the Bible verses, and
Yeah.
I didn't mean to go out and Bible bash people, but that's all I knew how to speak is the echolalia and all that sort of stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, you know, and sometimes saying stuff without understanding the context of it,
Right.
it's that
Yeah.
stuff that some, teenagers don't understand, like autism or whatever. They're like, "Oh, echolalia, what's that?" Or whatever,
Yeah.
and I've said
Yeah.
to those people, "Hey, look, I'm sorry, that was echolalia. I didn't mean it, now that I understand what it is."
Mm.
It's like, that. But, yeah, so
Can you explain that to the people listening?
sure. So echolalia means like you can like I wasn't such a good reader, but like I would hear it in Sunday school and stuff like that, and I'll pick up something and then I would just say it like wherever outside of context or whatever.
Mm.
But then people would be like, "Oh, you're a Bible basher, or you're this, or you're that." When actually it was me trying to communicate, but not knowing how to because
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Trying to communicate with people. It's what's really what I'm really noticing is that you've got a really good understanding about yourself and why some of these things. And how did you find out those things about yourself? Because now you're able to say, Oh, okay. I did that because this is what, this is why I was doing that. I was doing it because I was trying to communicate with people, but I didn't know how. How did you get that insight? Where did you get that from?
I guess I got the insights from reading books by other autistic people,
Yeah.
but it wasn't until I was in my adulthood that I started understanding what that actually meant. Like, because when I started reading books on autism when I was in high school, the only books in the library were all about like parents talking about their autistic children, but
Yeah.
there was no like books by autistic people, and so I only read like some, some silly stuff as well, which I thought was real when it's not real. So, but once I started reading books by Donna Williams or who was also known as Polly Samuels, I started realizing, oh, I understand why I'm different now, I understand what's going on because she could explain it in a way I could understand in her books. And people like Wen Lawson and Stephen Shaw and all those people. And as more books come out by autistic people, and especially non-speaking autistic people, because like when I started primary school, I was non-speaking, so very little speaking. And I still have moments where I can't speak now, so I use a speech device as well. And so and so I think if I didn't realize and accept my differences as an adult, that I may not, have come out as where I am today. But without my faith, I wouldn't be able to like press on, even though there were challenges.
Yeah. So your faith kind of gave you that hope and strength to go through these challenges, and the kind of research, I suppose, that you were doing helped you to understand and accept yourself. I'm guessing as well, did you it sounds like you started reaching out to the autistic community and as well, like were you kind of you started
I was
doing that
reaching
in
out
high
to
school?
the community. So I reached out to Jen Birch in New Zealand, and at the time she was like running like a pen pal autistic group. And so I used to write letters to like other autistics in New Zealand. And I would love, and they would send me letters, parcels. I just totally loved that. And then everything moved online.
Yeah. It's not the same, is it? Like, I mean, getting letters and getting parcels is so much better, but I guess at the same time, it's especially like if you don't like handwriting, that can be quite challenging as well.
Handwriting is really a challenge for me.
Yeah.
So but I love the online groups because especially Facebook, you use so many autism groups. You can type in whatever's going on for you and you get responses like like that, and you can think about it if you're autistic, and
Yeah,
if
you
you
got time to process.
and you can post photos and on Facebook, and it's just amazing. Technology is like, there wasn't speech like apps like devices like Prolo to go when I was like younger, so the advancements in technology is amazing. And
So good,
and
especially with AI and stuff like, man, where are we going to be in a year, let alone 5 years, like it's just advancing so fast. I just wonder for you, what was the speech issues that you had, was that related to anxiety at all?
it's a hard one. So generally there's a mixture of how it relates to me. So there were anxiety there was sensory overloads. So you go into a sensory overload, you can't always get your words out.
Right.
and yeah, and you just
That
shut
makes
down
sense.
or
Yeah.
freeze up. But then as I've gotten older, a diagnosis that's come on to me is catatonia in the context of autism.
Wow.
And that's quite rare in autistics, but autistics can be diagnosed with catatonia. And so that means your whole body freezes up on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like for me, like the catatonia would like affect me, my whole body would freeze up and I would only be able to communicate through my eyes.
Yeah.
So like I'm actually still waiting on like this organization to train my support workers in partner assisted scanning. So that's
Yeah.
where like someone holds like a communication book and they watch where my eyes go to.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
but that
cool.
happens these days. It still does happen when I'm really, really stressed.
Yes.
But if I manage my stress, and yeah, stuff like that, then it's less likely to happen.
Because
But
that's your brain, I mean, you know this because I can hear that you know this, that's your brain going into fight, flight, freeze. In your case, it's freeze.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's kind of a I'm in danger.
yeah,
Your brain telling that you're not safe. And yeah, and it's I imagine, like, talking about mental health and all of this, I mean, we're really probably just touching the surface of your story, but with all of this in mind, how did all of this affect your mental health?
so my mental health was affected quite badly. And I guess it was because when I was 21, they took the ID label off me, and then I lost my funded support because back then, autism without ID wasn't eligible for funded support.
Wow.
But that didn't come in, like autistics being eligible for funded support didn't come in until 2014, April the 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
I have a good funded package support now, but that's only because I've got the catatonia. If I had the right support, if the support wasn't taken off me in the first place, they wouldn't have to be spending all this amount of money on me.
Yeah.
No, it's kind of a bit crazy how the system works, but that's political stuff for you. But
Yeah.
so
It is
I guess
really. I like the
yeah,
system. If we, I'll be talking to some parents in the future, and um what's available and what's not available and how hard it is to navigate the system is
yeah.
unbelievable. Yeah.
So I guess after the ID was taken off me and I lost my funded support, I started self-harming, so then I
Oh,
ended up in the health system. And
yeah.
then, mental health weren't going to give me support apart from here's some meds, here's some meds, here's some meds. There was no
Yeah.
therapy or anything like that. It's like, come
Yeah.
on, shove out meds on us,
Yeah.
And but now that I've got funded support and stuff like that, and obviously I've got post-traumatic stress disorder, a lot of autistics do,
Yeah.
that affects you. But like with the support in place now, I hardly self-harm, like self-cutting or anything like that. I do
Hmm.
occasionally bang and self-bite when I'm really, really overloaded.
Is that
And
quite common? Is that common amongst autistics, those two things? Or
those
any
two
of them?
things, those two
Yeah.
things are common in autistics. But a lot of professionals blame it on autism and don't realize that, like, for 70% of us, it's because there's an underlying mental health condition going on.
Right. And that is actually intentional self-harm
Yeah.
rather than, so are they kind of implying that it's well, I mean, I guess self-harm, I imagine it's this relief of trying, you
Yeah.
experience a relief of anxiety is why
Yeah.
you
It's
do it.
both endorphins get released when you hurt yourself. So it
Yeah.
can be a bit of sensory and a bit of mental health, and they kind of
Yeah.
overlap one another.
Yeah.
and it's hard to like break out like what's what. But often if the autistic individual is telling you, I want the head banging to stop, I want this to stop, you know, generally they mean, you know, there's something going on for them.
That's really helpful to kind of determine that, because a lot of parents will be, you know, or yeah, a lot of people will be like, well, I talk to some parents who are like, oh, and I get them to stop doing this particular thing, and I often say to them, well, is it harming them? Like, let's say a child is sucking on their t-shirt, and their
Yeah,
t-shirt gets wet. Well, is that actually harming themselves or anyone else? No, but it's relieving their anxiety, and it's making them feel it's self-soothing.
it
So
is.
if that was in the context of school, it might result in bullying. So maybe in a school setting, it's not helpful. Maybe we can find something else that would be more socially acceptable, but in your home environment, it's not hurting anyone. Whereas biting or head banging or cutting, obviously, is
Yeah,
hurting their body. So what can we do to find, what else can we do to find
yeah,
a tool that would help to relieve that anxiety? Yeah.
or pain in some people,
Or
you know.
pain, and it's often pain, isn't it? It's like this
Yeah.
intense emotional pain, and that feels intolerable at the time. Yeah. Yeah, so they just gave you medication. They didn't give you didn't find therapy, or when your funding was restored, were you able to find some therapy then?
So, so mental health in Hawke's Bay, they did give me some therapy eventually, but it was only like
Okay.
10 weeks worth of
Mm-hmm.
cognitive behavioral therapy, and I had to buy the resources because they didn't have it. And I'm like, okay, now I'm thinking I shouldn't have had to do that, you know.
Mm,
They should have gone out and brought the resources so they could use it with other people, you know.
yeah.
I'm not the only autistic person out there with mental health issues.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but you know, now that I've got the funded support back and I have a lot of it, now it's like, and I have had experience of being under the Mental Health Act because I had a stress-induced psychotic episode, and that was really horrible. But
Yeah.
accessing funded support, I was able to get behaviour specialist support and stuff like that. And I've gone through ACC and stuff like that. And because now suddenly there is an impairment level on me, mental health don't want to touch me. It's like, no, it's disability.
Yeah.
Got to go to behaviour support. And I'm like, there's an 18-month waiting list.
This is what I hear all the time, is just
Yeah,
there's this desire to separate autism from mental health, and
yeah,
and saying no, that's, and when you're a child, they're like, no, that's a behavioral issue. You need
yeah,
to go through the channels of dealing this from a behavior point of view and seeing a pediatrician. It's nothing to do with mental health, and in my mind, it's ridiculous because you cannot separate them. You can't, I mean, I don't know how you feel. Yeah, I just don't see how and it's really just passing the buck. And
it
I've
is.
talked to some amazing psychiatrists who say to me, look, if it were my way, we would see you um, for this issue, but because of the system, because of the way the system is, we can't. So there are some genuine people amongst that
There are, you
yeah.
know, but often for adults in particular, and for some teenagers as well, for any neurodivergence going on, they go, just go privately, go privately, go privately, go privately. And I was like, we don't have all the money in the world to do
Yeah.
all that.
You know, it's a real equity issue, because you know, you were born with this. This is an
Yeah,
issue that you were born with, and therefore should be supported with. And as you said quite rightly, if they had actually invested in this right from the beginning, like really early on, then perhaps they could have prevented the psychotic episode. They could have prevented, you know, all sorts of things that actually in the long run, we all know if we're just looking at it from a money perspective, you know, that it would have cost them far less to invest in preventative therapy than, you know, than having to access services when things are really, really bad. But what a horrible experience for you.
Yeah, it's like they wait till we're like at the ambulance, and it's like, no, you need to like do it, prevent us from getting to be admitted into a psychiatric ward, you know, provide that, you know, specialist psychological support. You know, if they said, hey, look, we've got the funding here to do this, but we don't have like the staff, oh, how about we go fund you to go get a psychologist and go privately, you know, rather than telling us to spend our own money. They could be investing and, you know, contracting their services out to private psychiatrists and psychologists that are specialists.
Yeah, yeah. Totally agree with you. Yeah.
You know, at the ending point, I do want to get given a dig for the work that I do with Te Pau. And I'm a specialist autistic consumer advisor, and
awesome.
we've been working on the equitable access to wellbeing workforce framework, and that's for both disability, mental health, and addiction workforces. When working with autistic people or people with a learning intellectual disability that also experience mental distress, it's primarily for adult mental health, but it's designed to the edges.
Yeah.
And you can find it on the Te Pau website, which is TE space POU. And they're kind of in the stages of implementing it at the moment. You know, our goal is to improve the lived experience peer workforce as well. And so they can advocate for others, and then they can speak up for themselves. And so it's kind of lived experience sidelined with like the workforce perspective and all that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to change the world because I'm studying public policy.
Go for it. That's awesome. Maybe we'll see you in the beehive at some point in the future. You never know. And actually we could do with that, couldn't we?
Yeah.
We really could. We need some representation. And you're amazing. You know, like I was just thinking about it, like how, like it must have been, I don't know how it felt, you know, getting that intellectual disability diagnosis, but it's so clear, like it's so obvious that you're such an intelligent person.
Yeah. I guess having the right support at university, the first university I went to, they pretty much said, oh, you shouldn't be at university, you've got an ID. But they let me in anyway, but they didn't give me the right supports. But now I'm at the right university who does give the right supports, and I get very high grades.
That's awesome.
And oftentimes, like, because I get an academic assistant person in class with me, and when I'm not in class and they're taking notes for me, the other class peers, they don't speak up because I'm the usually one to start the speaking up in class.
Yeah.
Which is the total opposite of being in high school, but I guess with the right support there, that can happen.
Yeah. And what an amazing contribution that you know, like in many respects, people missed out on your contribution, and now we're getting to benefit from, the world is getting to benefit from your contribution because you're getting the right support and you're getting the acceptance that you deserve. Yeah, and so I suppose you know, starting with school, with teachers, what message would you give to schools and to teachers that you think would be helpful if they have someone, if they've got an autistic in their class? What do you think that they could do that would make it easier and life better for them, and not just from an education point of view, but from from a kind of, you know, developing that kind of culture of acceptance, what do you think they could do?
I guess they could buy some books on augmentative and alternative communication. There's some kids' books out there, and introduce the other children in the classroom to children that communicate differently, and model AAC in the classroom, and, you know, don't have low expectations on the child, you know, have high expectations that they are going to achieve, positive affirmations all the time, you know, just builds up their self-esteem. You know, it's okay if you've got a silver, you know, that's a good grade as well, you know, for an example, you know, and it's okay if you spelt that word wrong. We're going to teach you to spell it properly, or if you can't write, that's okay. We're going to give you a laptop, you know. Or you know, the noise hurts you. You can wear your noise cancelling headphones whenever you need to, you know, stuff like that helps us to have a quality of life. It may not make our autism go away, but it's the quality of life that we're looking for.
Yeah. And this tendency to separate, so you're doing like a different curriculum, or you're sitting at a different desk and things like that, you know, is that actually, in your mind, is that actually helpful? Because that happens a lot.
It happens a lot, and I don't think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have the person included in the classroom with a teacher aide, unless that child specifically states, no, I want to work on my own individually at this time to work on this, I'm getting distracted or whatever, you know, unless that child says, you know, some children might not be able to communicate that, but if they keep going back to the group, that means they want to join in with the group, you know?
And that's the thing, I know of autistics who prefer to have a space that they can go to where there's quiet, and they get to choose that as opposed to being sent there. So they can actually be included when they want to be included, and they can be on their own and have kind of that separate space when they need it.
It's about taking self-autonomy.
Yeah. And any messages to parents?
I guess for parents, don't give up on your children. And, you know, if the autistic person is struggling, like mentally, you know, reach out for help, because, you know, reach out to other parents, other autistics in your life. Find those supports around you. And, you know, if you find there's a barrier to accessing support, don't be afraid to access contact your local MP and raise the issues with them. And, you know, or don't be afraid to start petitions, you know, with numbers that shows the government that there's an issue going on and that they can do something about it, you know, if they listen to us, you know. You know, it comes with numbers and stuff like that changes happen, you know. It took me 10 years writing to the Ministry of Health to get autism included as in disability support services. So, you know, things do change when you do stuff, and obviously it can be exhausting as well. So if, you know, got whānau around you, you know, the Marae Church, don't be afraid to reach out to them for support, because that's what they're there for.
And Gabrielle, any kind of last kind of, I guess, messages for autistics who may be struggling in their mental health, may be struggling with feeling the way they feel about themselves, or maybe struggling with feeling lonely and isolated?
I guess for autistics out there that are struggling, I guess find some, you know, groups in your community that, you know, that may you might be really good with photography, so you could join a photography group, or you might like trains, so you could, you know, do something that helps you to feel happy, or autistic joy as we call it, and that helps to feel better. And don't be afraid to reach out for support. You know, if you say you're suicidal, you can say that on Facebook and someone will help you and help you ring up the crisis team if you can't talk to them. Don't be afraid to ask for that help, and always know that there is always someone that loves and accepts you for the way you are.
That's beautiful. And Gabrielle, is there any kind of online community that you recommend that you access perhaps, or that you know of, that people who may be feeling quite lonely can reach out to?
Yeah,
Or to
sure.
join?
So there is, I think the name of it is Autistic Aotearoa New Zealand support group, which is for Autistics. And I run an organisation called Autistic Advocacy Network New Zealand. That's also on Facebook. That's more for a collective, teaching them about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So if they want to learn more about that and their basic human rights and disability rights, they can join that group. And there's just a range out there. And some of them are secret, like groups, to protect the groups and the people in the group. So reach out to a person that that may be autistic and ask them for some suggestions, and we can give you those private secret links. And it's not because we don't want it there, it's just because we want to keep it safe for autistics.
Yeah, understandable. Thank you so much. Like, you're such an inspiring person, Gabrielle, especially with your advocacy, and amazing what you're doing, not just with Te Pou, but also your studies at the moment, the education that you're doing. And I feel really privileged to have spoken to you today, and really honoured that you would share your story with us. And I think it will be really, really helpful to those listening, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for interviewing me.